Welcome to MetaNetTV. This is Jon Southurst, and tonight it's my great pleasure to have returning Professor Steve Keen and Dr. Craig Wright. They're back by popular demand. We did a discussion session here about a month and a half ago now, and it was extremely well received. We got a lot of positive feedback and quite a bit of trolling, but I would say the ratio is about 90-10 positive. And as a result, here we are all back again. Before we go any further, I do want to apologize for the way my voice sounds tonight. It's been a really rough week of lying in bed with a chest cold and hanging out in Roblox with a bunch of 10-year-olds. So,
which is how you got the chest cold.
It could be connected somehow. It was pretty good just having all my conversations in text for a while. Anyway, guys, welcome back. And thank you very much for coming on again. Maybe if people haven't seen the last show, I should direct them back to Streamanity or YouTube on the MetaNetTV channels to watch it. I think I very creatively titled it Economics and More. So I'll try to give it something a little bit more interesting sounding this time.
Certainly.
On the left, we have Professor Steve Keen. Steve Keen is an honorary professor of economics at University College London and the author of the books Debunking Economics and Can We Avoid Another Economic Crisis? Dr. Craig Wright is chief scientist at nChain and author of the Bitcoin white paper. So welcome back, guys.
Well, thank you. So how do you feel being on the left now, Steve?
I think the usual story, they're using the wrong axis for me.
Yeah, I thought both of us would probably be a lot more centrist than that, but I guess for today we can be left and right. You can take the Democrats and...
I'd never forget about the American situation. I've always been, my political sympathies are left, but in terms of social issues and stuff like that, but I see a lot of left-wing politics and particularly left-wing ideologies about as dangerous and useless as the right-wing end. So I'd rather be a different axis altogether.
I know. It's amazing how they like to put everything in one little box.
Yeah.
So obviously you agree with sort of businesses, so therefore you must be against homosexual marriage and all this other BS that they come up with. And like you can't have multiple views and beliefs.
I know.
Modern politics.
Like in terms of I'm just doing a piece on climate change right now, and I know that because I accept the science and I'm attacking the economics. I thought, okay, they're going to typecast me as a lefty. So I said, if you want to see my first academic paper, it's just proving why Marx's Labour theory of value was wrong. Suck on that.
I don't accept either. Yes, there's climate change. I mean, they've moved to climate change rather than global warming because we're supposed to be 4 degrees warmer by next year. And I don't think that's going to...
No, we're not, Craig. Sorry. They're going to disagree on it straight away. I know the predictions of 4 degrees is something of the order between 2050 and 2100. Nobody's playing 4 degrees next year.
That's incorrect. The guy who came up with the hockey stick graph originally said 4 degrees by 2020. That was back in the beginning of the 90s. And he got discredited on that one.
Michael Mann. Well, let's not go down that route because I don't know that particular reference by Michael. B, I doubt that it's the case. So let's not go down that one. Let's stick with it. Yeah.
I do because I was actually working on some of the VAB data analysis when I did statistics. So I know some of the things that have been twisted because when I was doing my master's degree in statistics over a decade ago now, I remember what we said and then what people took it to mean, which were two different things.
Well, that's the same with the limits to growth, which I've actually bit off a poor academic's head a couple of days ago when he told me the limits to growth had predicted running out of silver by 2000. And I said, that's a table from the Department of Mines, United States, that they happened to publish inside. It wasn't their effing prediction. Poor bastard almost fell off his chair. I was so angry. Anyway, my apologies on that one.
Well, you got to remember that we were going to run out of oil by 1920, and then 1930, and then 1940, and I think we're already out of oil according to some people, and then the whole Club of Rome. I think we're like way beyond where we're meant to have no oil, and yet we keep finding some.
No, that's not the limits to growth argument at all. That's partly more peak oil coming out of Hubert's peak. And that was, just to get on record, there's not a prediction of the limits to growth. So, the limits to growth is online. I wish people would read the original book. I've copped a lot of misreading. I'm mainly taking on mainstream economists about it. I haven't got an effing clue about anything, rather than people in general. So, but I'm horrified by how badly they've understood the limits to growth research.
I'd argue that a lot of them don't misunderstand, but it's incentives. Economics is all about incentives, of course, and when you're getting paid to write something by a government department or think tank or whatever else, and you have political agendas, then you probably do what you get paid to write.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't take that. I know people working in climate science, and I know economists, and on the latter basis, economists, they're paid to say what they do for free. They're zealots. Okay, I don't justify. Certainly, people will use what economics say as a means to make money, in the sense of they say a piece of bullshit, we can make money out of that bullshit. But the economists themselves believe the bullshit. They're not paid to do what they're doing, what they do for free anyway. Much more dangerous.
Yeah, they're the worst type though. The zealots.
Yeah. Yep. Indeed. So where are we going, John?
Well, you guys just jumped straight into the deep end there, and by the way,
jump back out again and start with where you want to run the conversation from.
I also want to apologize for some of the Skype difficulties we're having tonight that will cause some of the pictures to freeze sometimes.
Yeah, I think mine's frozen at the moment. I'll try.
Yeah,
I can't even see mine, so I can't comment.
Steve's looking okay. Craig is frozen, but you're quite lucky you've been frozen in a very flattering position. So it could have been a lot worse. I've definitely been frozen making worse faces than that. But
that was
anyway,
acceptable, I think.
I think climate change is a pretty heavy topic to begin with, and it's pretty fraught because there seems to be a whole spectrum of opinions on that. Like it's definitely not a black and white issue. And as you were saying before, it's a shame sometimes that politics has to be such a package deal. You're either on the left or the right, and if you're either one of them, you have to accept every argument that comes with it, which is one of the reasons I just can't get involved in politics at all these days. So, well, I guess that leads me to the question.
And back.
You are.
Yes,
looking good too.
For a minute there.
Nice bouquet effect too. All right, so I guess my first question is is economics inherently a political science?
I'd answer yes. And the reason is you're talking about the distribution of income. You can't avoid talking about it. Neoclassical economics frames itself in such a way that it can't actually ask intelligent questions about it or give intelligent answers. But that itself shows the politics behind reducing everything to utility maximizing individuals without talking about whether they sit inside a social structure or a class structure. So I see it as inherently, it should be political economy in the sense that if you're talking about income, you're talking, and wealth, and the distribution of both, you're talking politics.
Well, the start of the studies was actually political economy, going back 100 years, and we've just dropped the political part. Now, the interesting that I would argue, not necessarily, if you're looking at microeconomics and the study of certain business structures and whatever else, then it doesn't need to be political. But when we're talking about economics, people don't generally talk microeconomic concerns, theory of the firm, whatever else. They're talking the economy as a whole, the macroeconomy, etc. So that's the only caveat I'll put here. So when we're talking economics,
But we'll come back with a reverse caveat, and that is the theory of the firm and the empirical data they look at and their theory of individual behavior is all there to support the ideology. Because when you look at the empirical data, it completely contradicts the conventional theory of the firm. Firms do not face rising marginal cost, they face falling marginal cost. And the reason they don't take into account is once you do that, process as being an allocation mechanism between commodities, it becomes an income allocation mechanism between social classes. Not that they're even aware of that, because they wouldn't even know a feature of empirical data if it hit them in the face.
I'll probably argue a little bit different from social class. What my argument would be sort of time horizons. if you look at the way that many companies have actually acted sort of post the whole monetarist regime, we're now getting into where people are doing short-term growth, where we're talking about we lay off people and that's our third quarter. We undercut customers and that's our next quarter. Rather than thinking about this as a long-term growth game, where we're thinking, how do I build my company over 10 years? How do I leave it to my great-grandchildren? I mean, when Henry Ford invented a company of the structure he had, he was thinking about how my grandchildren will have this company. Now people think, where do I go in 6 months? There's no, I mean, and then we undermine the entire structure of what builds a good company. How can you be loyal and passionate about a company and a business if you are afraid that a year's time you're going to be laid off just so that someone can get a bonus?
Yeah, that's the whole shareholder value mythology underlay a lot of that as well. And what that's given us an incredibly short-term focus, the 3-monthly quarterly statement hang up. The same thing about how share markets are valued. So I prefer firms back in the days when they were run by engineers rather than people in management, in marketing. And that's what actually has been encouraged. We have people that Marx once described as the roving cavaliers of credit, given the license to take over management of corporations, and the real world said, when this gang knows nothing about the real world and should have nothing to do with it. And I think he's absolutely spot on that front.
And ironically, all those people who use Adam Smith don't even realize that Adam Smith wasn't arguing for the financiers. He was arguing for the people who actually do the creation of wealth, of goods and services. Money not being wealth. Wealth being the things that you create.
Yeah, well, one of the funny things as well is that people associate Smith with deregulation, market control, yada, yada, yada. But of course, there's had a debate with Bentham over the rate of interest. And he was in favor of controls in both the floor and the ceiling of the rate of interest, saying that that above a certain level, the only people who'd borrow those loans would be what he called projectors. We'd now call them Ponzi schemers. And he was in favor of, he said, if the interest rate gets too high above that level, then the only people who are going to get money are going to be one you don't want to give money to in the first place. And he was dead right. Whereas Bentham was arguing in favor of complete freedom for setting the interest rate, and spoke about what he called the crying shame of usury, defending usury, saying there shouldn't be any controls on the rate of interest. So Smith, and a lot of these neoclassicals will go back and claim they are descended from Smith. When you read Smith, he contradicts what they're actually aiming for. So,
well, I mean, they've got this advertising rule here in England now, where you've got to, in very small print, put the actual amount you pay as a yearly interest rate on credit cards and things now. And I was looking at one the other day, and the fine print basically says an APR of 81.5% per annum.
My God.
And I mean, and they're guaranteeing that anyone will get a credit card.
Yeah.
Well, yes, because you're paying basically everything doubled.
Yeah.
I mean, that's absolutely ridiculous. Even selling the idea of financial freedom by basically making someone a debt slave is horrendous.
Yeah, exactly. And that's like I've seen this is my whole focus is on the importance of the level of private debt and the role that it has in the economy. And one of the most important charts, I actually haven't got it in the set of charts I put together for our chat today, but there's a guy called Rick Battolino, who was the deputy governor of the Reserve Bank of Australia. And he managed to get his staff to go back and dig up long-term private debt data for Australia, which was then used by Fisher and Kent, running probably the only worthwhile paper ever written by the Reserve Bank of Australia, comparing the 1890s with the 1930s. And they said the 1890s was far worse because of both the scale of private debt was higher than the Great Depression in Australia and the number of bank failures. But that particular data showed an exponential growth in the private debt to GDP ratio starting in about 1965. And Battolino referred to that as the democratization of finance.
I keep going over this because, I mean, actually, I've got a paper here in front of me. It's from 2000. It's called Looking a Gift Horse in the Mouth, an analysis of free internet stock offerings. It was about things like web IPO and tokenized securities as they appeared in the mid-90s. So
Yeah.
MyGo, other things like this. Effectively, you would call them an ICO now. They were exactly the same. They were distributed web tokens,
Yeah.
where people would just issue free internet stock, which the SEC said isn't free, because when you're giving your personal information, even that has a value to these companies, and they would go and sell it. So there were companies actually would get you to sign up, put all your personal info, get your credit card, charge you nothing, but then sell the information. So even that was worthwhile to them, and so therefore it wasn't a free offering. But on top of that, it's like ICOs now. These people would say, "I've got an idea for a company." And then they'd raise lots of money and then go, "Oh, well, it didn't work," and disappear. And the thing people don't seem to understand is that it's not about money being wealth. Wealth is what you created. So because you've got an ICO and a token, so what? And I mean, we've fallen for the same things all over again.
Yeah.
And this is my really big bitch about Keynes. If Keynes had been smart, he wouldn't have said pyramids or digging holes in the ground. I mean, I know he wanted to try and make a point about that stuff, but the reality there is that's not creating wealth. And trying to get this idea into society that wealth is just working is wrong. Working for no reason is wrong. But if he'd actually got people to understand that even if it's building a road and it's not the best road, it's still infrastructure. Building new bridges, infrastructure. Building extra railway stations, infrastructure. That would have been so much better. But unfortunately, he had to take it to this digging holes and pyramid bit.
Well, it was a glib line. I mean, that's the problem about it. That's a particular quip by Keynes, which I think is one of the quits. If you could grab him out of the coffin yesterday, he regrets that particular quip. But what he was really talking about is that this is one thing which actually relates to the Bitcoin discussions we had last time round, that there's a conflict between the store of value role of money and the means of exchange role of money, which most people aren't conscious of. But people if you try to store money, if you think you're going to use it as a hold on for dear life and watch it appreciate, what that means is you don't use it for transactions. And
I agree.
That result means that it means you spend, by trying to save more, you actually spend less. By spending less, GDP falls, and your idea of trying to save money actually reduces income. And I now demonstrate using my Minsky software to show that it's actually a one-for-one correspondence. Local individual saving leads to collective fall in GDP. And but the trouble is, with this obsession on the store of value thing rather than the transactions, you've actually undermined what money is supposed to be doing, which is enabling transactions that enable that wealth creation you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, I've got problems with GDP itself, but that's a different issue.
You're not the only one. You're not the only one.
I mean, it measures everything, no matter how bad it is. Once again, it's the digging the holes in the ground and filling it up.
Well, I mean,
blowing up a building and rebuilding the same building.
Well,
that's all GDP.
Yeah, well, that's one thing I'm working on is the role of energy in production, and part of that is saying that GDP effectively is useful work when you look at it in energetic terms. And therefore, if you want to define useful work, you could then break it down from a consumer point of view into what are the main uses we have for energy, and that becomes your Maslow's hierarchy of needs: food, transportation, clothing, etc., etc. And if you want to define transportation, then you'd have an objective of moving a certain mass, a certain distance, and a certain time. Let's say between London and Tokyo in 10 hours. A mass of 80 kilos, and then anything which means you run into turbulence or slow down or spend more fuel actually reduces your GDP.
Yes, only one little thing there. How about things that don't actually move mass anymore? What if we've actually removed through technology the need? Like, we're not sitting in the same studio having this conversation. So we've actually now come together and we're sharing information in something that 20 years ago would have required that all three of us move our physical body into the same location so that we could be filmed. And now that's no longer the case.
Yeah, I mean, certainly those are ways in which we actually achieve them. In that case, what we're saying, the actual service we're giving is communication, not transport. And we take the transportation leg out and dramatically improve the efficiency. That's certainly important. The thing with me, I'm actually trying to get the physical basis where it right to begin with, because we've had 250 years of economists not understanding the role of energy in producing anything. So they've got everything wrong, including the physical world, and I'm getting the physical side straightened out first.
But see, that's what I also say. For instance, the light bulbs up above me. The average here is like 5 watts or less, and to get the same luminosity, that would have been 120 watts just a few years ago. So what are we measuring? Is it? I mean, how do we measure the output?
My definition there would remember the number of photons of different frequency falling on a sheet of paper. So that is your measure of overall efficiency. And then, of course, if you're wasting a huge amount of infrared radiation, then that's getting rid of that actually improves your GDP. So all those things matter for measuring. And we don't understand how we produce output. We don't understand how we measure consumption. Those are both. It's rather disgusting at virtually the end of capitalism. We still haven't worked out the basics.
Well, it's funny that we're actually, in some ways, we're going back towards a anti-capitalist system, and we're calling it capitalism, but it's really mercantilism again. The protectionist regimes, the businesses protecting themselves, making sure that we grab all that stuff, create government monopolies, and I'd actually say that we're going back to what Adam Smith fought.
I think we're going to have a different destination ahead of us, which is the impact of climate change on capitalism, which is, I think, is going to make what Adam Smith fought look like a picnic.
Well, I'll disagree with you on that one, but that's a different matter.
Okay. So, John, do you want to give us any direction here? Because we are sort of floundering around a bit here. I know you're trying to save your vocal cords, but what did you want us to discuss today?
Well, I mean,
I was looking more at the Minsky and financial instability stuff.
Sure. At the end there, you did kind of
about that as well.
You did kind of loop back to the whole economics as a political issue thing, because one of the things that always discouraged me about economics was that no matter how much you study it, no matter how right you are, you will always have people fighting against you just on ideology. And I guess it can be the same with physical sciences as well, but particularly with economics, just because it's so difficult to prove what you're talking about. But it's based on models and predictions and projections. I guess climate change is quite similar as well. So
well, we can't afford to find out climate change the hard way, so it's actually more significant. But in terms of economics, the funny thing is, I think it's actually quite easy to find the data to verify the approach that I take and to trash the neoclassicals. It's the fact that they don't look at the data that actually matters, because their mental framework tells them this data doesn't matter. They don't even analyze it, but it's standing there in black and white, or in my case in red and blue. And it's a bit like with Galileo trying to argue with Copernican astronomers who refused to see the moons that were orbiting Jupiter. Which they could see through his telescope, and no, they weren't. They couldn't possibly be moving because my model said they can't be there, and that's the world we live in with mainstream economics. So I take the point that it's fundamentally political, that ideology can't be removed, but I think there's getting to be enough evidence over time, and there's enough structural momentum to capitalism that you can have theories which empirically end up being shown to be wrong.
Yeah, it seems you face two battles.
Every theory ends up wrong to a point, but it's how wrong and what bounds move.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm working on. The neoclassical is so wrong. It's one of the major problems capitalism has is neoclassical economics. If we got rid of that, then we'd be able to handle the capitalism much more easily, because we wouldn't be driving it using a series of myths. So on the Minsky stuff, by the way, I mean, I had to look it through I know there was just a sort of a note-taking piece, Craig, but a couple of things I wanted to mention. Of course, you were going back to the neoclassical sources there, and again, no criticism of that. It's the obvious thing to go take a look at. They dominate the literature. They are trying to understand money, and you were using their concepts in overall framing Minsky's arguments. And to me, using neoclassical economists to understand money is a bit like using Ptolemaic astronomers to plan a shot to Mars. They're completely in the wrong vision of how the universe operates. And also, you've used a lot of the work on asymmetric information, which is, Joe Stiglitz's contribution to mainstream economics. There's an element of that, no argument, and that's certainly the case when you had things like CDOs that were, people putting together knew they were shit. The people who received them were told they weren't shit by a ratings agency, and that's a huge part of the crisis in 2008.
I actually disagree there. I think they knew they were shit, just they thought they could hand them off to someone else quicker.
Yeah, because they bought them back as well. Of course, they needed to have them both out of their portfolio, which is hilarious. I mean, that's what I really enjoyed. It wasn't The Big Short. I think the best movie about the 2008 crisis, I think, was Margin Call. Did you see that one?
I did actually.
Yeah, I think it was quite good. The fact that they were buying and selling basically on both sides of the trade, and then of course that works so long as you can get off the hot seat before everybody else got there. And bang, of course, that's the story. The show they get out, wipe everybody else out, and then they'll allow trading in the market again. Like in terms of looking at this, the explanations you were looking at in neoclassicals in 2008 were mainly about the trust issues, etc., etc. My focus has always been on the absolutely overwhelming data that exists in terms of private debt and credit, and that's what Minsky's own hypothesis led me to look at. And when I put my analysis together, I finally managed to download a whole range of long-term data series from the census, US Census, the Federal Reserve, and so on. And I told my students when I first showed them this data that if I was trying to make the case for my hypothesis, I wouldn't dare make up as data as obvious as the data that I found in the real world. So I might just quickly show you those if I can.
Yeah.
Possible, certainly. John? Okay.
Sure. Yep.
So I'm sharing screen. I hope I'm sharing screen here. What's happened? Let's see.
Give it a go.
Okay, and I just tried it. Share screen options, switch screen.
This is going to be
Hang
fun.
on a second. Are you seeing my screen at all or not?
I'm just seeing your face right now.
I'm not seeing your screen.
Yeah, bloody Skype is doing its thing today. Let's see. Share screen.
What can we say?
Display 1, display 4. What the hell? It's showing me display 1 versus display 4. Not showing me my screen at all.
Sometimes I think Skype made a big mistake when they decided to put a watermark on everyone's screen. It's
oh, bloody hell. All I'm seeing, if I share my screen right now, you can see a small word display 1, a small word display 4, and nothing else. If I choose share screen, I've done that. Now, what the hell are you guys seeing?
Your
Anything?
face.
Fuck. Thank you, Microsoft. Thank you, Bill. Shit. I don't know what to do here because...
Could you print it off on a bit of paper and just hold it up in front of your face?
You're still seeing my face, are you?
I am, yes.
Bloody hell. Let's go back here.
Well, I've got your PDF if you want to tell us the page.
Yeah. Okay, well, I'll start with the first...
Yeah, I mean, for people watching this, is there somewhere that they can go?
That's the only way to go about it. So the first page shows long-term data on private debt and credit in the USA from 1834 forward. And what I define debt as the actual dollars you owe, so it's a stock, whereas credit I define as the rate of change of that stock. It's a flow in dollars per year. And I assembled the data is all derived from the red line. That's the level of debt in the economy. And I was stunned when I did this graph. First of all, two things. The obvious trend towards debt rising. Whenever there's a fall in debt, then there's a turning point. It's rising again. It's hardly ever horizontal. It was only horizontal between about 1848 and 1860. But when you look at that rising level of debt, you then take the rate of change of that debt, which is credit. You can see there are 3 periods where there's massively negative credit. 1837, which is actually known as the Panic of 1837, the Great Depression, and then a whole long period without any negative credit whatsoever, and then the financial crisis in 2008, when it goes from plus 15 to minus 5. So those are America's 3 major crises. I wasn't even aware of the Panic of 1837 until I produced this chart, saw the negative credit phenomenon there, went back and checked the data. What happened back then is known as the Panic of 1837, and it was more severe for America than the Great Depression. A large part of the whole cowboy mentality came out of that. So that's showing credit coincides with the major downturns the economy's had. Page 2 looks at the relationship of credit. Again, the
But
same part.
one problem though, you've
Yeah.
got percentages and debt not to actual capital or value or wealth. So that becomes a little bit problematic. So
Doesn't make much difference, Craig. There's a fairly close relationship between measures of capital and measures of GDP. Pretty close.
I mean, I'd still look at it differently. I mean, I'm putting my statistician hat on, and when you do it this way with the percent of GDP, that way, that's sort of the things that make statisticians groan.
Fair enough. I can understand that. But I'd say if you put the capital in there, you find there's a relationship between capital and output, which is actually due to the, as it turns out from my energy research, the efficiency of conversion of energy and machines to useful work. And that's ranging between a factor of 2 and a factor of 4 inverted over time. So it doesn't make a lot of difference. The trouble is capital values themselves are so subject to bubbles that you get distortions coming out of that. So I prefer just to normalize it to GDP itself.
Yeah, but I'm not so much thinking about stock prices or anything like this. I'm thinking about what goods do we have, what are we actually producing, what's being consumed, etc. And GDP is a horrible measure of that.
Yeah, but it's the only one I've got. So, particularly going back to the 1800s, I'm stuck with using it. Well, let's go on to the next one, which then shows that USA credit and unemployment over the very long term. So I've got unemployment data back to 1890, and doing a simple correlation of that with credit, you get a minus 0.3 relationship between the two. That's a very extreme view because that includes all sorts of periods, including the First and Second World War, and periods of very low private debt and periods of very high private debt. But just to show the overall relationship. Go on to the next slide after that, and that's the relationship of credit and unemployment during the financial crisis we've just been through. And this is where I throw my bricks at mainstream economics because particularly Bernanke in particular, dismissing Irving Fisher's debt deflation explanation for the Great Depression, which is the foundation of Minsky's financial instability hypothesis. He said, outside implausible differences in propensities to spend, pure redistributions, which is what he sees credit as, should have no significant macroeconomic impact. Now, there's a correlation coefficient of minus 0.85. Whatever you might say about the underlying stats behind there, that's not something you can ignore. And when you look at the same data for the Great Depression, which is the next slide again, the correlation gets up to minus 0.9. So we have an enormous correlation between credit and unemployment. And this comes down to what, in my own attitude to Bitcoin in general, by the way. I think a lot of the arguments about the argument for Bitcoin, whichever form it takes, was about the reliability of bank ledgers. I think the more important thing is the role that banks play in creating too much credit and financing asset bubbles.
See, that's where I'll totally go against you. No.
Good. Yep.
Nothing to do with it there. I mean, Bitcoin's about having a ledger that can be honest, can be traceable. I mean, I keep pointing out to people that there's this big, thick tome here. I'm frozen again. It's Man on the Legal Aspect of Money by Charles Proctor. It's fairly much the Commonwealth world's version of the legal aspects of how money evolved and whatever else. So looking at money and law and etc. And traceability's always been a critical aspect of money, even with cash, because there are limits on cash. You can't take wads of cash through the airport, for instance, without it being traced. Generally, little beagles that look really cute start sniffing at your leg, and then guys who aren't so cute come up and start patting you down. So there are limits on traceability. There are limits on how it's used. So Bitcoin solves a lot of those problems with DigiCash and things like that didn't allow proper traceability. On top of that, Bitcoin is the first system to allow micropayments. And although this is overlooked, that is a critical aspect of transacting on Bitcoin. If we can allow people to do transactions for 1,000th of a cent, there isn't a system in existence allowing that right now.
No, look, I agree entirely there, Craig. That was one of the things I learned from talking to you last time round, because that's not possible with the Bitcoin. They talk about Bitcoin Frankenstein. I think we agreed on that term last time round.
Correct. Yeah.
But if Bitcoin SV,
that's the point. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the original Bitcoin actually mentions enabling peer-to-peer cash. When I launched it, I talked about all this stuff, and everyone's sitting there going, "Oh no, that's not what we want." Well, unfortunately, I didn't realize the people that I was talking to had a completely different idea of what they want from money. They wanted it to enable escaping government and things like this. I didn't ever invent Bitcoin to escape government. I mean, but imagine if we had Google being able to charge you 1,000th of a cent per search. There's no longer selling your information. There's no longer collecting these things. It creates and opens up so many new models that I can't even start to imagine.
Yeah, like, for example, like as I agreed last time round, the fact that micropayments didn't exist is a major reason for the collapse of journalism. Because if you could actually pay, so what they're doing at the moment. I mean, I subscribe to the Sydney Morning Herald, the Guardian, and the New York Times. I'm not going to subscribe to Deutsche Weekly or God knows whatever else to read one article. But if I could do a micropayment, I'd happily pay a micropayment for that. So journalism,
and even better, it allows you to then say, this particular author, this journalist is really good. I will follow him around, whether he's at this place or another one, and people can have individual reputations. I mean, this is one of the things in journalism now. You buy the Wall Street Journal, you buy the New York Times, you buy the Times of London, and you get whatever they decide you get. I can't selectively choose, but with technology, I should be able to.
Yeah, absolutely. So this, in that sense, because, and I've seen that, I mean, people sent me hundredths of a cent after our last conversation on Bitcoin SV. Thank you for setting it up, John. So that
did I do that, or did someone else?
Does actually work at that level? Was it you who set that up, or somebody did?
No, I think it was someone from the BSV community who set you up there.
Yeah. So that's a sign that it functions in that way, and that, to me, that is actually addressing a serious need. Whereas the HODL, they showed held on for dear life. That's obsessed about money as a store of value, and if you obsess about money as a store of value, you undermine its success as a transactional medium. So in the sense, what you've done is quite a successful with the Bitcoin SV. How did that stress test go? By the way, the targeting 5,000 transactions a second.
Oh, that was all fine. We can do much more than that, and as we open up all the block sizes and everything like that, I mean, we got over 1.5 million transactions in a block on the test network. So, I mean, not a problem. I mean, my goal is to get it over 1 million transactions a second. So,
okay. What does that mean?
It'll take time, of course.
Does that involve, what is actually the main need more parallel processing or changing in the transactional? Processing.
Yeah, it's no, the actual transactions and blocks and everything like that are fine. The parallelization is actually a hard issue. It's not that it can't be done or a new computer science. It's actually really difficult to code parallel transactions well. We don't have a lot of tools because people like Microsoft, when they took over Windows, had single threading for a long time, and everyone's learned how to code badly. When I started, you had VAX and all these other systems that were actually in parallel naturally, like RISC-based
vector processes rather than scalar processes. Yeah.
And that was the common norm. And as we moved away from Unix into the Microsoft world, we came into this single thread world. And even when we're running applications, we run one application, one thread, and then say, oh, our CPU can now do many things. Well, it's still not how it's meant to be. We should be running lots of individual parts of the application simultaneously.
Yeah, and that's the whole idea of both the vector processes and also the parallel coding, which because the issue, obviously the monetary system, you've got to make sure that transactions occur in sequence while you're actually processing them in parallel. So I can see the challenge.
I know. I mean, it's happening. But when we're talking about something that is a monetary system, we can't rush too much. Because we have to make sure that it's done well, that it's tested, that security is ensured. So all that fun. But I mean, in February, when we roll things out, we'll be in the tens of thousands of transactions per second, which, seeing as we're not using that much, we'll just keep ahead of where the market might want to be, allowing it so that no one ever gets full or anything like this. That if people need to be faster, they can pay a little bit more. If they don't care about waiting 5 minutes, then that's fine, and let markets decide.
Craig, I might ask you a bit of a Dorothy Dix question here, and that's what is the advantage of Bitcoin SV doing its million transactions on chain compared to Bitcoin BTC, which is trying to keep the block size small and move all of its microtransactions and consumer transactions to a completely separate layer like the Lightning Network? But
you're not actually doing separate transactions anyway. I mean, people love to ignore FATF and MLD5 and monetary law requirements and say, oh, well, you don't need to because it's crypto. Liberty Reserve was crypto. It got shut down. So if you're going to have monetary transactions, you have to keep records. You can't go, it's Lightning, it's a new technology, I'm just not going to store that data. You have to. So if you're running a Lightning node, you need to, by law, store every transaction. You are a money transmitter. The FATF rules say that if you're exchanging cryptocurrency, then you are a money transmitter. Now, you can sit there and go, it doesn't matter. It's only the President of the United States has said this is important. It's only Europe. It's only China. You start running out of world you can live in. I mean, if you want to live in Sierra Leone, great. But crypto, you can't run crypto mining facilities in Sierra Leone because if you get anything worth more than, say, $5, some warlord with an AK-47 comes up and says, that's mine now.
You need a legal framework. That's something that I actually appreciate in your conversations because a lot of the neoclassical live in this fantasy world of barter. They leave out the legal structures entirely. But capitalism is a legally and government-defined system. As much as it is a system of markets, it's a system of governments and laws as well.
Do you think barter ever really existed?
No, it's a total myth.
I don't know of any case of real barter having existed. I think it's like these Yap stones. Everyone loves to say how in the island of Yap, these big stones were there. No one realizes that if you read the original diary of the first explorer to the island of Yap, when he was talking about Yap stones, they were about 1 kilo each. So they were small. It was actually that they became these huge things after Lloyd's of London started sending steel ships around. And it was actually not made by the islanders, but Lloyd's of London started buying up bits of the island saying, our stones are bigger than yours.
I wasn't aware of that. Okay.
Everyone loves to ignore these little twists to the story. And
have you read David Graeber's Debt the First 5,000 Years?
Yeah, I don't agree with a lot of it because he's got a lot of errors. I mean, he could have made a very good story, but he decided to be a bit like Piketty and go too far and just companies are bad.
The part that he talks about is the actual whether barter has been found or not. I was actually looking at that part of the book, and
that's actually right. He actually did that one well.
And what you see is when they find instances of barter, they're ritual ways of exchanging between tribes that are close to breaking out into war, and in that situation, you will undertake barter as an extremely elaborate ritual, basically to stop the men reaching for the spears and killing each other. Whereas normal transaction is based on credit and trust.
Exactly.
And the danger with capitalism, of course, is that credit gets centralized in the banks themselves, and trust, therefore, gets centralized there. And the last person you should trust is a banker standing between you and a bucket of money. You're going to get run over.
Well, that's the other thing. Everyone keeps saying Bitcoin gets rid of trust. Bitcoin doesn't get rid of trust. The whole thing of having a ledger that proves what actually occurred is now I can build trust. I know that you can't get away with screwing me over because I have a record of our purchase. I can actually say to a court, this is what happened. So that means I don't need to rely on only trusted parties anymore. I can start building trust relationships all around the world, knowing that because I don't need to worry that you're going to rip me off, I can start actually trading with you. So it's the exact opposite. It's actually a way of building trust, not removing it.
Yeah, and that's the fundamental. People are looking for a commodity basis to money as well, which is another fallacy. To seeing money as gold. This is what I find with the Austrians in particular. I had a lot of gold bugs giving me a hard time back in Australia in around 2012 when gold was, I think, 1,500 before it fell to below 1,000 again. But when you look at history and say when has barter occurred, the answer is virtually never. When has gold been money? The answer is whenever social systems of trust are broken down. So you have mercenaries being hired by competing kings to kill the other competing king. And in that situation, mercenaries of both sides insist on payment in gold because there's no telling whose mercenaries are going to win the next battle. And you might be trusting a king who dies. So during the 100 Years' War, the 30 Years' War, at that stage, gold and silver became much more a means of exchange. But once those huge disputes were settled, then it's back to the king's currency and the currency issued by banks that created the money.
Unfortunately, here in England, we lost all the tally sticks.
I know, that's a great trade.
After they burnt down Parliament.
It's hilarious. I mean, imagine how different history of money could have been if there was an obvious, a forest of sticks that were the basis of commercial activity in England for 800 years. And people don't realize how it was in the 1860s, wasn't it, that the Parliament burnt down? It's 1840s to 1860s anyway, something in that range.
I think the UK Parliament's burning down all the time, isn't it?
Right until then, pieces of wood with a main broken in the middle and with the stock and the what they call it, the stock and the stub. The records, that was the form of commerce. Had nothing to do with the value of the stick. It was just being used as a record and trusted record. Again, as you're saying, cryptocurrency.
See, this is the other thing people don't realize. The origin of notes as we now have them, they became more valuable over time because more people signed them. So it was like a check. So if you're looking at negotiable instruments, bills of exchange, etc., what would actually happen is someone would make a promissory note and then you would sign it and you would hand it over to John and John would hand it to someone else. And every time you signed it, like in Bitcoin, you had this chain of signatures.
Okay. Yeah.
And actually it became more valuable the deeper it got because then you would actually have all these extra people to use as witnesses. So a new note was actually less negotiable than one that's actually been flying around the system for a long time.
Intriguing. Actually, a couple other references, if you haven't seen them, I'd recommend looking at the history of money. One is by a woman called Jane Gleason White, and that's called Double Entry. And that explains the evolution of development and evolution of double entry bookkeeping. And in that, she goes back in the historical records. Of course, that the cuneiforms were fundamentally records of credit transactions. She said that, I wasn't aware of this till I read her particular book, again, more recent archaeological research. Archaeologists had found all these little clay pots with lids that had little animals inside, and their initial reaction was to think they were kids' playing toys. In fact, they were the original representation that predated the cuneiform, because you'd put a few little cows or whatever else in as a signatory of the amount of debt you owed. The symbols for the people as well, and bake the lid. And after a while, they realized they'd actually be better off recording the information on the outside, and that's where cuneiform itself developed. So, the history of transactions and trade is based on commerce, is based on credit and trust, and
I agree.
And keeping durable records, which again, as you say, that's
Again, though, the only difference I'll say is Bitcoin is a commodity, but it's an information commodity. And still, the problem with Core is they've abandoned the use of information. So they've said it has to be pure money. We can't have information stored on chain. Well, then there's no longer a commodity because
who's Core? I don't know that one.
Core
that's
refers
the BTC guys.
BTC Bitcoin.
Okay. Yeah.
who have been working radically to make sure that everything that I've been trying to get into Bitcoin is stripped out and it goes back to being e-gold.
Yeah. I mean, I don't see it as a commodity in the sense you can't use it for anything else. My definition of a commodity is something which is produced using other commodities and has a specific use of some description.
But that's because you don't understand what you can do with informational exchange. So information is a commodity. You can use it, you can sell it, you can basically value different amounts at different levels. I mean, it's the old economist bit, information is the new oil. So how you can then buy and sell that data is important, and how you can actually use it. So it's not just writing a small web page or anything like this. It's actually taking it much further and allowing people to start owning small chunks of information, to have very small micro payments to buy and sell this sort of stuff. So over time, that allows us to open up all sorts of things that I can't even imagine yet. Yeah. Which is actually what makes me really happy, because if I can't imagine, I can imagine a lot of things happening here, but all these new things that I have never thought possible, opening up, like one of the ones that we've got Uptime SV, who are doing uptime monitoring and everything like that by outsourcing it to people. And if you think these people maybe earn $20 a week doing things, and people go, yeah, but that's sucky. But you can have people in Africa, Rwanda, and places like this who now sit there and pay off a mobile phone, pay off internet access, earn $20 a week, and maybe they've only been earning like $20 a week before that, and they've just doubled their income just to occasionally swipe a screen and do a few checks. That radically changes the global economy.
Yep. Okay. Yep. I mean, take a look at the definition of commodity. If you're looking for references that are outside the neoclassical world and have a better understanding of money, look for a paper by Graziani, Augusto Graziani, called The Monetary Theory of Production in 1989. It's online. And Graziani gave the first very logical derivation of the role of money in a capitalist economy that ever made complete sense to me. And that was that normally, if you look at the neoclassical model, what you've got, they fundamentally have two people, each with a commodity, trying to work out a relative price. That's the barter model. That's their model of money. And that's what what I find is very dangerous about mental constructs that are wrong. They get into your head and they block your thinking in other ways. So this two-person, two-commodity relative price thing was how most people thought about money. Graziani, working from first principles about what is a monetary economy, end up saying that a fundamental money transaction is three people and one commodity. You have a person selling, a person buying, and a person whose promises to pay are accepted by both parties, enabling transaction by transferring a promise for pay from the buyer's account to the seller's account. And the basis of that was saying that, first of all, money, to have a monetary economy, it cannot be using the commodity as money. Now, the logic there is that if you're saying it's a commodity money, you're saying rather than having an N commodity world, you have an N plus one commodity world. You're still working fundamentally in the sense of a barter system. Then he said, if you're going to have it can't be a commodity, it must be something ethereal. Well, you can't have the person who creates the ethereal thing being able to use that and exploit the power of seigniorage. So I ended up saying the only way to make all these things work is that money is a promise to pay for a third party. And fundamentally, in that sense, Bitcoin is still fits within that, with that concept, because you have a promise to pay of a transaction chain fundamentally.
Yeah, well, it is effectively a promissory note. I mean, so chain of digital signatures is really a chain of ink signatures, the same as you had in a promissory note, except now in a modern form. But I'll still actually argue the commodity bit there just a little bit differently. I mean, I'll even argue that fiat, in a way, is a commodity. Fiat is backed, like everyone says, fiat's not backed by anything. It is. It's backed by this requirement to pay my taxes, my requirement to pay the government in a certain way that they have decided. Whether we like the fact that the government have said you must pay me this way, I don't get a choice. So if I want to pay the British government for my taxes at the end of the year, I can't go up to them and go, I'm going to pay you in Bitcoin. I'm going to pay you in gold. I'm going to pay you in lead. I'm going to pay you in platinum. I have to actually go there and pay them in pounds.
Yep.
So there's a value to this. I have an option of not paying them in pounds, in which case I flee England and never come back.
That's right.
Or I get to have a holiday at Her Majesty's discretion.
Indeed, and that's where modern monetary theory takes exactly the same perspective and says that the commodity fiat money is backed by the power of the state, and that power of the state, of course, has to be manifest through physical objects which have little pointy ends at one end and a trigger at the other. So in that sense, the backing is by fiat, by power, rather than by physical commodity.
Yeah.
Pardon me.
Okay, well,
so I mean, it's a commodity. It's just not one that most of us want.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
that can happen.
Yeah.
But, guys, I know there's
two things. Time, Craig, you're supposed to be hopping on a plane, aren't you?
Yes, I was just about to mention that.
We'll have to make another call and get out of here and whatever else in a couple of minutes. So I got about 5 minutes.
Okay.
I think I should slap a big to be continued on the end of each one of these videos.
No problem.
Yeah,
I mean, if they're popular enough, you're always welcome to come back and continue on the discussion, or go off in as many directions as you like on a certain theme. So
have a good journey, Craig,
let's do that.
And,
not a problem. Well, thank you very much. But I find it really interesting that as sort of we can have differences in opinion, and when you step outside some of the ideas of the crypto world and people who are anarcho-capitalists or whatever else, people who don't agree necessarily on a lot of things can still actually have a debate and find common ground.
Yeah,
I mean, this is a problem with these guys who run around going, "Oh, government force, you can't do it, get away," and become.
I know. I mean, they live in a fantasy world. They want their fantasy world to become reality.
I know.
Good luck with that. Good luck with that.
Unfortunately, we're in this world, and you just have to put up with it. You don't get to change everyone.
I know, that's for sure. Don't get too hassled in Japan.
Not a problem.
Okay,
all right.
bye-bye.
I can make sure
Great
that happens.
talking again. See you later.
All right, thanks a lot, guys. See you in Japan.
Okay, John, bye-bye. Yep.
Bye.
Later.
Bye.